Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So picture this. You're a new parent, still in the hospital recovering from childbirth. Your beautiful baby girl is just 3 days old, sleeping peacefully in her cot right beside your bed. You're exhausted, but you're filled with that incredible, overwhelming love for this tiny person you've just brought into the world. You drift off to sleep, and when you wake up, the cot is empty. Your baby is gone. This isn't only a parent's worst nightmare. This is exactly what happened to Celeste and Mornay Nurse. Their newborn daughter, Zephany, vanished without a trace. What followed was a 17-year nightmare. For nearly 2 decades, they searched, they pleaded with the public, they celebrated their missing daughter's birthday every single year with cake and a prayer, never giving up hope. They lived in a state of limbo with a wound that would just not heal. And then, after nearly 2 decades of false leads and crushing disappointments, the case was broken wide open by the most unbelievable 1 in a billion coincidence you could possibly imagine. This is the unbelievable story of Zephany Nurse. If you're new here, this is what we do. We get into many true crime cases and we try to make sense of them together. If that sounds like your kind of thing and you want to be part of our little community here, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It honestly makes such a big difference if you could also hit that like button too. That's just the best way to help the channel out and get these important stories in front of more people. And of course, feel free to share because this case, everyone needs to know about it. Also, for those of you who want to be a bigger part of what we do on here, you should think about becoming a channel member. When you join, you get to be part of our private Discord server, and that's where the conversation really goes down. We can talk more about the cases, you can throw out your theories, you can tell me what cases I should cover next, and we can also just chat and get to know each other. It's a really great group of people, so if that sounds cool to you, click that join button right below the video. All right, let's get into the case. Let's talk about Celeste and Mornay Nurse. They were basically kids themselves, teenagers living in a place called Mitchell's Plain, a town just outside the scenic city of Cape Town. They had just met, fallen in love, and within a year they were married and expecting their first child. Celeste was only 18 years old, and I believe Mornay was around 18, 19 as well. And like any young couple, they were a mix of shocked and excited, and they had already picked out a beautiful biblical name for their daughter, Zephany Joy Nurse. But the world they were bringing this child into was anything but a fairy tale. Mitchell's Plain was known for its dark history. It was a township created by the apartheid government back in the 1970s, designed as a segregated area for so-called colored families who had been forcibly removed from their homes elsewhere. While it was once promoted as a model township, by the late 80s and 90s, the dream had ended. Many parts of Mitchell's Plains had deteriorated, grappling with serious problems like gang activity, drug use, and endemic crime. And it wasn't just Mitchell's Plain. All of South Africa was in a state of turmoil. The historic end of apartheid in 1994 was a moment of incredible hope, but it didn't magically fix the country's deep-seated problems. In fact, crime was actually exploding. Between 1994 and 1999, violent crime in the country shot up by 22%, which is a lot. In 1997, the murder rate in their province, the Western Cape, was a huge 80.6 per 100,000 people. So to put that in perspective, that's more than 10 times higher than the most dangerous cities in the United States today. This was the backdrop of today's case, a society struggling with newfound freedom, but also with chaos, violence, and instability. It was into this world that baby Zephany Nurse was born on April 28, 1997. That day, Celeste and Mornay went into the world-famous Groote Hospital to deliver her baby via C-section. This is the same hospital where the first ever human heart transplant was performed. Now, I believe Celeste actually delivered her baby earlier than planned and she had gone to a different hospital, but because she ended up needing emergency C-section, she ended up being transferred to the Groote Hospital. The surgery went well. Both mom and baby were healthy and safe. For Celeste and Mornay, it was a moment of pure joy, like it is for most parents. They had their beautiful baby girl. They had the nursery all set up. It was decorated in blue, yellow, and white. They had all their baby items ready for their new daughter. Their little family was complete. All they had to do was bring their new baby girl home. But that joy, that perfect moment, was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. 2 days after the birth, on April 30th, 1997, Celeste, just 18 years old and recovering from major surgery, was exhausted and under heavy medication. However, during her 2 days spent recovering, Celeste cuddled Zephany, fed her, and formed this special bond that only a mother and baby could understand. She fed her, she changed her, she gave her her first bath where she was admiring her daughter's soft, dark hair and she thought she looked like Simba from Lion King. She thought her daughter was so incredibly cute. She essentially was just waiting to be discharged from the hospital. Her bed was positioned near the ward's entrance. It wasn't a far walk to the elevators and then the exit. So that same day, Celeste was feeling pretty groggy. She was half asleep, recovering while still caring for her child with the nurse's help, of course. So while she's in bed, Celeste heard her baby Zephany start to cry. And if you don't know anything about newborns, during the first few days of life, pretty much they sleep all day. They have very little awake time or alert time. So they just really feed and sleep, and you just got to feed them, change their diaper, and put them to sleep. So as Zephany cried, I'm assuming she was either just chilling and then got uncomfortable, started crying, or hungry, or she was asleep and woke up crying from hunger or needed a diaper change. And she was in her bassinet next to Celeste's bed. Celeste was in her bed, and as she looked up, she sees a female nurse sitting by the door to her room. The nurse walked in, came over to the bassinet, and comforted baby Zephany as she was in the bassinet. The nurse looked at Celeste and asked softly, "Can I pick up the child?" Celeste, being so drowsy from the pain meds, I believe she was on morphine and she was like half asleep, but she trusted the nurse would continue comforting the baby. And it's not unusual for maternity ward nurses to cuddle newborns, to comfort them, even take them to their front desk and hold them so that the mom can get a little rest. So Celeste, being in a maternity ward, being a brand new mother, Celeste gave her permission to the nurse and drifted back to sleep, trusting that her child was safe in the nurse's care. But it was the last time she would see her newborn child. About half an hour later, another nurse came into the room to check on Celeste. She kind of gently shook her at first. She shook her awake and she goes, "Celeste, where's your baby?" Celeste was confused. You know, when you're waking up and you're like, wait, what? What's going on? It takes a second to kind of register what's going on. But then the nurse kept asking, "Celeste, where is your baby?" And now the nurse was more persistent and she just kept questioning, asking the same question. Celeste explained that another nurse came in and was comforting the baby, so she assumed she took her, maybe for a walk, a cuddle. But the other nurse said, no, that didn't happen. Panic erupted. Celeste ripped the IV from her arm. Blood was pouring down her arm, and despite her recovering from a C-section that took place just 2 days ago, she was frantic. She began screaming, running through the hospital corridors in a desperate search for her baby. As some nurses ran everywhere looking for baby Zephany, other staff called the police to help in the search, and the hospital went into lockdown. But it was too late. Baby Zephany was nowhere to be found. The kidnapper had vanished with the baby. When Mornay returned to the room and was told his baby girl was taken, he completely fell apart. He collapsed in a fetal position, shaking, sobbing uncontrollably, and he was in a fit of pure grief and rage, and he smashed a medicine cabinet, sending bottles crashing to the floor. You can't blame him. This young couple had to now deal with the fact that they had to go home to a house filled with brand new baby gear, to an empty nursery, to a silence that was deafening. Their dream had turned into every parent's worst nightmare. And when I put myself in their shoes and I think about what it was like having, babies and then bringing them home, especially that first baby, when it's just you two and you bring that new baby home. When you're a new parent, you're like, oh my God, the baby cries all the time and it's so stressful. But then putting yourself in someone's shoes that didn't get to bring their baby home, whether it was from something medically going wrong or something as horrific as this, there would be no worse feeling. You would pray for that baby being in your house crying and you getting no sleep. You would pray for that. It's a parent's and a mother's worst nightmare. The police searched the hospital from top to bottom. All that was left were traces which confirmed that a crime had been committed. Zephany's zip-up sleep suit, a discarded handbag with no clues as to who its owner was, and a pillow was found abandoned in a corner of the tunnel/corridor in the hospital leading from the maternity unit to the road outside the hospital. So this tunnel basically linked to the hospital's old main building, the psychiatric department, and the outpatient section. It's basically there to give women in labor a shortcut directly into the labor ward. But this time, it provided the kidnapper with a quick exit route to leave with someone else's baby. Access was unrestricted at the time, but after the kidnapping, obviously, it was closed off. As witnesses later came forward, it looked like the kidnapper was pretty careful in moving through the ward unnoticed. The pillow found in that tunnel may have been used to fake a pregnancy, and the kidnapper would have slipped the pillow under her shirt, and no one questions what a pregnant woman is doing in a maternity ward, right? But I also believe that holding a pillow in a hospital looks like you're about to be admitted, or you already have a room and you're walking around. So if the kidnapper had another item to maybe fake a baby bump, or already had, a bit of a stomach, the pillow also kind of acts like a comfort item used while in hospital. So I feel like either way, you wouldn't be questioned. Also, Celeste saw a nurse comforting her baby. The kidnapper was wearing maroon pants and an oatmeal top, the same clothes as the hospital's nursing sister's uniform. So the kidnapper was acting alone and stole the nurse's uniform and put it on pretending to be a nurse. And that is if, in fact, there was only one kidnapper and the nurse had not been an accomplice. So the kidnapper, now a woman dressed as a nurse, apparently made an effort to be friends with the mothers-to-be in the ward. Celeste said one of the moms to be, the only woman who actually remembers the kidnapper's face, had spoken to her briefly and said that the woman had been very friendly. So when this mom returned to her room, I'm guessing she went to the bathroom, and if you have a private room, you have your own bathroom, so you can leave the baby in the bassinet kind of unattended because it's not a public ward, it's in your room. So when she returns from the bathroom, she sees that same nurse holding her baby. So when the mom asks her, what are you doing? The woman replied, the baby had been crying and she was comforting it. But the woman was like, I don't think I even heard the baby crying. Now that's bad, right? Well, this wasn't the kidnapper's first attempt. The day prior, so April 29th, 1997, the kidnapper almost did this to another woman. The kidnapper had taken another woman's newborn and began making her way to the exit. This woman's name was Shireen Piet, and as the kidnapper was holding Shireen's baby and walking away, suddenly Shireen, she saw her and she confronted her. So the nurse returned the baby to the mom, claiming, the baby was crying. I was just comforting the baby. So Celeste believed that the kidnapper's intention was to steal a child, and she didn't care which child it was. The police who searched the hospital just found nothing to give hope to the nurse family. They came home to nothing. For days after that, Celeste still hoped and prayed that what was happening was not real, that it all might just be some kind of sick joke, that somebody would just bring her daughter home. At night, while she laid in bed, she could hear the cats crying, and sometimes those sounds sounded just like a newborn baby. Imagine that gut-wrenching feeling, guys. As a mother, your child being taken from you at the very start after you've waited 40 weeks for a child you've dreamt about, prayed for, to finally have that baby in your arms is an unexplainable feeling. And for that to be taken from you, there are no words. Shortly after, the neighbors of another woman living in another suburb called police. They claimed that they had never seen this woman pregnant, and then she just rocks up with a newborn baby. The baby had a striking resemblance to Zephanie, light-skinned, black hair, and they had to investigate. However, that baby turned out to be a boy, and that was the end of that, but it didn't end. Celeste and Mornay went through excruciating pain. They had to search fields for a dead baby, for baby remains. They looked in people's homes for their baby. When Celeste was in public and would hear a baby cry, she would approach the mother and ask to just see the baby to see if it was her baby. I mean, the pain is unimaginable. What they had to go through is unimaginable.
Weet jy wat jou naam is? Wat vrouwen net mooi bring die baba terug, ons sal niks teen jou nie. Want sy behoort aan ons.
The years that followed were strangely contrasted, two parallel lives unfolding together, completely oblivious to one another. For the nurse family, it was a life defined by a loss, a wound that never healed, and for the little girl they called Zephanie, it was a life of love and normalcy. Celeste and Mornay refused to let the world forget about their daughter. They never gave up hope. In a 2010 interview, Mornay's words were heartbreakingly, defiant. He said, "I'll never, ever, ever give up hope. I can feel it in my gut. My daughter is out there and she was going to come home." They made sure Zephanie's memory stayed alive. Every year on April 28th, they would hold a birthday party for her. Often a local supermarket would sponsor, a giant cake, and the media would cover the event, reminding the public of the little girl who had vanished without a trace. And that's the sad thing about people who suffer loss, whether it's, a situation like this or whether it's something else. People forget, people move on, and people stop caring. And I think that's one of the hardest things the families have to go through. Celeste and Mornay hired private detectives. They made regular media appeals and endured the cruelty of false leads, including this 2009 extortion attempt where a woman, I believe they knew this woman, demanded a ransom of 500,000 Rand for information about their daughter. So this woman literally called them up, I believe, and whispered, "I know about your daughter," before demanding the money in ransom and organizing a meetup at the local KFC. And Mornay went to the meetup. He was wearing a wire, but the woman never showed up. And the woman was later identified as Glenda Dubell, who was a neighbor to Celeste's mom. Glenda was arrested and charged with attempted extortion. Celeste and Mornay went on to have 3 more children, 2 daughters, Cassidy and Micah, and a son named Joshua. But the ghost of their missing firstborn loomed over the family. Cassidy, their second daughter, later revealed the profound impact it had on her childhood. She said her parents talked about Zephanie every single day. And as a result, she grew up in a world of extreme caution, in a home of locked gates and bolted doors. She was never allowed to play outside alone like other kids. And in a really sad statement, Cassidy said, "I felt like I was the other Zephanie who was just being kept there to take that pain away. She was living in the shadow of a sister she had never even met." Meanwhile, fast forward to the year 2015. Just a couple of miles away from the nurse's home, a completely different story was playing out. A 17-year-old girl named Michelle, an only child, was at home excited about the dress her mother, Lavona, was sewing for her. Her mother loved her. Her father loved her. She was actually raised by these 2 super loving parents, and being the only child, all the attention and focus was on her. Her mother showed her the finished dress, and Michelle loved it and showed it to her dad. Her dad, Michael, was like, "Absolutely not. You are not wearing that dress to the dance." And he was so overprotective of Michelle. She was the love of his life. She told her dad, "Don't worry, Dad, the dress is cute and I'm going to wear it anyway." It was Michelle's last year of school and she was excited for the first day of school. So we're in January 2015 and 14-year-old Cassidy was starting her first day at a new high school, Swanswick High School in Cape Town. The first day went really well, but soon kids started telling Cassidy, "Hey, there's another girl here who looks exactly like you. Is she your big sis?" On the other side, friends of Michelle, the 17-year-old, kept telling her about the new girl who looked just like her. Some people would even say, "Hey, Michelle, I just saw your little sister in the hallway." And she would be like, "Girl, I'm the only child." At first, Michelle thought it was really weird, but then she decided to go find the new girl and look for herself. Michelle and Cassidy met up in a corridor of the school and both immediately felt they had this instant connection. The 2 of them eventually became really good friends despite their 3 to 4 year age gap, and they spent a lot of time together, and Michelle would call Cassidy baby girl and Cassidy would call Michelle big sis, and they would go to the bathroom together and Michelle would brush Cassidy's hair or they would put on some lip gloss together. They basically were glued together from the moment they met. Cassidy actually confided in Michelle about an older sister she had that was kidnapped shortly after birth. Michelle thought it was a crazy story. She almost didn't believe it. Sounded like a movie, and yet her close friend was telling her about this horrific experience that her family went through. People would talk about how crazy it was that they looked so similar and that they must have been, related in another life. Michelle and Cassidy took a selfie together and both girls found it really funny how similar they looked. So Michelle took the photo home and showed her parents, like, "Look at my new friend, don't we look alike?" Her mother, Lavona, said, "Wow, yeah, you guys totally look so familiar." And her father, Michael, said he recognized Cassidy because her father owned an electrical store nearby. They thought the girls looked pretty similar, but it wasn't really a big deal and they just moved on. After Cassidy came home with the news about her doppelganger and new friend Michelle, her parents, Celeste and Mornay, they couldn't stop staring at the girl in the photo, thinking about how similar they looked. But they eventually moved on. However, Mornay, deep down, knew he had to investigate, but he did so with extreme caution. After nearly 2 decades of false leads and crushing disappointments, the last thing he wanted to do was give Celeste another round of false hope. He decided to handle it himself, quietly. Now, side note, at this point, Celeste and Mornay were going through a divorce. I mean, they had been through a lot together. Celeste had even battled cancer a year earlier and won. And they just went through a lot. Their relationship went through a lot, and they ended up breaking up, with Celeste even becoming engaged to another man after this. And Mornay ended up in another relationship where he had another child. And this was all happening around the same time. But despite this, their fight for Zephany was a uniting factor for them, and they remained on good terms. So Mornay told Cassidy he had a question for her new friend Michelle, and if she could ask her the next day. So when the two girls met at school the next day, Cassidy asked Michelle, "Were you born on 30th April 1997? Michelle said, "Why? Are you stalking me on Facebook?" Cassidy laughed and said, no, I'm not stalking you. I just wanted to know when you were born. So Michelle said, yeah, I actually was born on 30th April 1997. Cassidy came home and told her father that, yeah, Michelle was actually born on that day. Mornay was shocked. He initially watched Michelle from a distance whenever he dropped Cassidy to school, and he would try to catch a glimpse of Michelle, and when he did, he would have this burning feeling in his chest. He scrolled through Michelle's social media, looked at every photo, and thought to himself, this girl looks just like the rest of my kids. So a week or so later, Cassidy, Michelle, and some other girls, I believe they skipped school and went to a local McDonald's, and Mornay happened to come along, and it was a casual setting, I guess, where he could observe them without raising any alarms. And as he sipped his coffee, watching them eating burgers together, the resemblance was undeniable. He started asking Michelle some gentle questions. He asked her when her birthday was. She said April 30th, 1997. It was the exact date his daughter had been abducted from the hospital. During their conversation, Michelle even mentioned something that stung Mornay. She said, Cassidy and Mornay really looked alike, but she herself didn't look like her own parents. Mornay knew that, he had to tread carefully. He didn't want to scare her. He wanted to protect her at all costs. He managed to take some photos of Michelle without her realizing it, and later he finally showed one of the pictures to Celeste. For Celeste, it wasn't a matter of logic or evidence. It was pure, visceral, maternal instinct. The moment she saw the photo, she knew. She just got that feeling inside. She grabbed at her chest and said, "This is my daughter. I know this is my daughter." Convinced they were on the verge of an unimaginable breakthrough, they took everything they had to the police. The authorities handled the situation with sensitivity, sending undercover cars to follow Michelle and her parents, whenever they drove. At this point, Cassidy and Michelle just started distancing themselves from each other, and both kind of felt awkward about the situation. Cassidy knew what was going on, that an investigation was taking place, but Michelle also felt like she was being investigated, and it was really awkward. The once close friends were now breaking apart. And again, this all happened in a really short span of time, within a 1 to 2 month period. Michelle was confused. She felt this tension around her. And I know it's actually a short period of time, but in school, you see each other every day. So time kind of moves a lot slower in a way because you have hours and hours together. So from spending a lot of time together, Cassidy was now short and kept her distance, and Michelle was also confused, what's going on? So a few weeks later, in early February 2015, I believe, Michelle's at school. It's a normal day. While she's in math class, the principal walks in and calls Michelle to the office. Michelle's like, oh my God, what did I do? I didn't skip class. I didn't do anything. And we can all imagine that panic when you get called to the principal's office. So she grabs her bag and goes to his office, and she sees 2 women sitting there. They turned out to be social workers. They spoke softly and sweetly to Michelle and began asking her a few questions. They pulled out this big file and asked Michelle, where were you born? Michelle says, according to my birth certificate, I was born at Retreat Hospital. So they start looking through their file, they're scrolling the pages, and then they say to her, there's no record of Michelle Solomon being born at this hospital on 30th April 1997. They tell her they will be conducting a DNA test on her. Michelle is so confused at this point. She's like, what do you mean I wasn't born there? And, can I have my parents present, at least my mom present? Why am I being interrogated? Why are we doing a DNA test? She was so confused. They tell her, no, since you're over the age of 12, you don't need a parent present. Michelle was upset, but she agrees to the DNA test because they told her there was no record of her being born at the hospital that was actually listed on her birth certificate. So she was pretty curious. And then they told her about a newborn being kidnapped and that it was Cassidy's older sister. So she consented to the test because of this, despite being incredibly, as you can imagine, overwhelmed. So they take her to a clinic where the test would be conducted, and they then tell Michelle, you can't go home. Your parents might leave the country with you, and we cannot have that. So Michelle had to go spend the night at a safe house. And she was so upset, so confused. She didn't feel in danger. She didn't feel her parents were flight risks or dangerous. So it was all just too much. And Michelle didn't even feel safe in the safe house. She was seeing a lot of things that she was not used to. And she ended up actually living with one of the social workers after being granted permission because she told this social worker, I can't be here. I can't live in this house with everything going on. Michelle had so much belief in the mother who raised her. She believed she would never lie to her, especially about who she was and where she came from. She was sure the DNA test was going to be negative and this was all just a big mistake. But she was wrong. The test results came back the following day and proved without a doubt that Michelle Solomon and Zephany Nurse were the same person. Michelle was in shock. Her entire life had been a lie. She was unable to return home for another 3 months, I believe, because that's when she turned 18 and that's when she could make her own decisions on where to live. On the other side, Celeste and Mornay waited for the results that would either confirm a miracle or deliver their most devastating heartbreak yet. Finally, on February 25th, 2015, the phone rang. It was a detective. He said the results were in. And then he spoke the words they had been waiting 17 years to hear. He told Celeste, you are a mother again. It was a match. The 17-year nightmare was finally over. Michelle Solomon was without a shadow of doubt their long-lost daughter, Zephany Nurse. The story of a stolen baby girl, now a young woman on the brink of adulthood, being found by chance almost 2 decades later, made headlines in South Africa and around the world, and Michelle's life just changed immediately. The same day the Nurse family received their miracle news, the Solomon family's world imploded. The person who kidnapped Zephany was identified, and it was her own mother. Well, the woman she believed to be her own mother, Lavona Solomon. The 51-year-old seamstress who had raised Michelle was arrested. Michelle was now legally identified as Zephany Nurse. What followed was a high-profile trial that gripped South Africa. In court, Lavona presented a defense that the judge would later describe as, a fairy tale. Lavona had been abused and raped as a child and beaten by boyfriends so severely that she suffered a series of miscarriages. She had previously given birth to a healthy baby before the baby tragically died at 6 weeks old. She claimed that after suffering a series of these, heartbreaking miscarriages, she was desperate to have a child of her own. She told the court that back in 1997, she had been in contact with a mysterious woman named Sylvia, who had supposedly been giving her fertility treatments, I believe. And according to Lavona, this Sylvia woman arranged an adoption for her. She claimed she paid Sylvia 3,000 rand, and I believe that's only a few $100s. And she was simply handed a baby wrapped in a blanket at a busy train station. She insisted she believed it was all legitimate, a private adoption. She was told that the documentation to adopt this child, formally would be sorted out later, but she had a bad feeling deep down when the paperwork never came. But her story was full of holes. This Sylvia was a ghost. She could never be found or identified. And of course, there were no adoption papers, no legal documents of any kind to back up her claims. Lavona's entire defense rested on the idea that she was just another, victim in this story, a desperate, grieving woman who had been tricked. She even told a psychologist that she didn't believe she had committed a crime and that her only offense was being a good mother to a child. The prosecution, however, painted a very different picture, one of a calculated, methodical predator. They presented a mountain of evidence against Lavona. There was the testimony from other mothers in the maternity ward back from 1997 who all remembered a woman matching her description acting suspiciously. A witness from that time even picked Lavona out of a lineup nearly 2 decades after the crime. But the most damning evidence came from Shireen Piet, the woman who had caught Lavona trying to walk away with her baby just a day before Zephany was taken. Her testimony proved premeditation. It showed that Lavona wasn't a woman who made one desperate mistake. She was actively hunting for a baby to steal. In a stunning courtroom moment, the prosecution produced the original police sketch made from Shireen's description back in 1997, and they placed it side by side with a photograph of Lavona from that same year, and the resemblance was just undeniable, guys. On March 10th, 2016, the verdict came in. Judge John found Lavona Solomon guilty on all counts: kidnapping, fraud, and contravening the Children's Act. He didn't mince words, calling her story a fairy tale and stating that the court rejects it with the contempt it deserves. A few months later, on August 15th, 2016, Lavona was sentenced, and taking into account her previously clean criminal record, but stressing the profound and irreparable trauma she had inflicted on the nurse family and on Zephany Miche, the judge sentenced her to 10 years in prison. The legal chapter of this story was over, but for the families involved, the emotional turmoil was honestly just beginning. The world's media portrayed the discovery of Zephany as the perfect Hollywood ending. The lost child, found against all odds, was finally going home. But the reality was so much messier, so much more complicated and heartbreaking than any headline could ever capture. The first meeting between Miche and her biological parents, Celeste and Mornay, happened after the DNA test, and it was not the tearful, joyous reunion everyone had imagined. It was arranged by social workers in this sterile office at the police station, and it was painfully awkward. In her own book, Miche described the moment with raw honesty. She said, "Celeste and Mornay walked into the room. They cried when they saw me and hugged me. I hugged back, but I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing." I mean, that is devastating. Devastating.
I burst out into tears when I saw her. And she kept me like this in her arms. The first time when she saw her dad, and she was standing in front, and he was standing at the back. And I couldn't know, I couldn't explain the feeling, what I was feeling. And when she came to me, I couldn't stop crying. I couldn't stop crying. I said, "Finally, I found you. For 17 years, I've been looking for you. I found you finally. You're mine again." And she cried. She said, "Thank you. Thank you." And
she was just a 17-year-old girl whose entire world had been detonated. The mother she adored was in jail, accused of being a monster. The father she loved was heartbroken. One day he had a full family, a wife and a child, and then the next day he walks home to emptiness. No one was there. And these two strangers, her real parents, were crying in front of her, expecting a connection immediately. She simply didn't feel. She was angry, confused, and felt like her life had been stolen from her all over again. In an interview, she articulated this turmoil perfectly. She said, "What if I didn't want to be found? What if I didn't need saving? What if I was perfectly fine living in a lie? I was perfectly fine." As Miche watched Celeste and Mornay in court and saw them attacking Lavona in the media, she couldn't reconcile their portrait of an evil baby snatcher with the loving, indulgent mother who had raised her. The woman who had made her school lunches, who sewed her dress for the school dance, was now being called a criminal. The entire foundation of her life had been a lie, and the truth was even more painful. As Mornay himself put it, it's actually very complicated because the foundation has been a lie. Currently, the foundation has a lot of holes in it. It's not going to be easy. Ultimately, Miche made a choice that shocked many people. She chose the family that had nurtured her over the family that had given her life. During the trial, she broke off contact with the nurse family, and after she turned 18 in those 3 months and was legally an adult, she made the decision to move back in with Michael Solomon, the man she had always known as her father, the man she viewed as her home. Now, obviously, Celeste and Mornay were absolutely devastated. I believe they broke down in tears. Now, the court found that Michael had absolutely no idea that Miche was not his real daughter. So the story goes that Michael believed Lavona was pregnant at the time and gave birth by herself and presented baby Miche as their daughter. It is now believed that Lavona was pregnant in 1997, had another miscarriage, concealed this, faked the remainder of her pregnancy, and brought baby Zephany home, showing Michael and pretending it was their child. Lavona said that she had contemplated telling Michael and Miche that she was adopted, that Lavona arranged for the adoption after suffering that miscarriage in 1997. But Michael and Miche's bond was so strong, they were so close. Michael loved her so much, she didn't want to break it. Lavona said she struggled herself to bond with Miche as a baby. She would often look at Miche as a child and say, how can her biological mother not want her? Now, this is based on her story of adopting this child at the train station. She said this child was so beautiful, how could a mother not want her? And later, according to Miche, Michael's family, like Michael's side of the family, always doubted that Miche was his child. They were like, you don't look like Michael. And they kind of always believed that Lavona had had an affair and had Miche with another man. Miche choosing Michael over Celeste and Mornay, it was an unimaginable pain. They had found their daughter only to lose her a second time. Miche was trapped in an impossible identity crisis. So the world knew her as Zephany Nurse, the stolen baby, but in her heart, she was Miche Solomon. In 2019, she fought to have the legal publication ban on her identity lifted, not to embrace the name Zephany, but so she could publicly claim the name she had always known, Miche, and tell her story in her own words. In an incredible act of grace and complexity, she has forgiven Lavona, the woman who stole her, and she even visited her regularly while she was in prison. When she wrote her book, she dedicated it to both of her mothers. Her story forces us to ask a really hard question. Who is your real mother? The one who gives you your DNA or the one who raises you, loves you, and shapes who you become? For Miche, the answer was clear. The bonds of nurture of 17 years of lived experience were stronger than the facts of nature.
How dare you say, love a criminal? That woman stole you, she took you away from a family. Yes, but that is the only mother I knew for 17 long years, and it's not my fault.
It's such a tough situation for everyone involved. This is the life Miche knew, all she knew. You can't expect her to just uproot her life and move in with a family that she doesn't even know. Miche dealt with depression, suicidal thoughts. She really struggled, and she sort of had to be the one person who she thought her biological parents thought she was, Zephany, but then she was also truly another. Her real identity being Miche Solomon, someone who came from a loving family and has had 17 years of life experiences being Miche. Coming from being an only child too to now having 4 extra siblings, it would have been very hard. But on the other hand, this is what Celeste, Mornay, and their kids had been fighting nearly 20 years for. So it's really wild. It's such a tough situation. Today, Miche is a mother herself. She has 3 children of her own, and she has said that becoming a mother has given her a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the pain her biological mother, Celeste, must have gone through. She has bravely taken control of her own narrative, sharing her story through her powerful book, and I think it's called Zephany, 2 Mothers, 1 Daughter. And, she also participated in this award-winning documentary called Girl Taken. I highly recommend you guys watch that. The relationships remain incredibly complex. While Miche has now grown close to her biological siblings, especially Cassidy, her relationship with Celeste and Mornay is still described as somewhat complicated and painful. The immense trauma and the difficult aftermath took a heavy toll on them as well. In the years after Zephany was found, Celeste and Mornay actually rekindled their relationship. I believe they got remarried in 2020. They aren't on bad terms, Miche and Celeste and Mornay. It's just not going to be the fairy tale reunion like we all want it to be, even 10 years later. And what about the woman at the center of it all? On August 18, 2023, after serving about 7 years of her 10-year sentence, Lavona was released from prison on parole. Miche actually participated in the victim offender dialogue process that is a part of parole considerations, another chapter in her incredibly complex relationship with the woman who stole her but also raised her. Incredibly, Celeste has forgiven the woman who essentially destroyed her life at one time. She said after Lavona was released, "When I see the woman that took her, I would like to give her a hug. When I see her, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for what you've done. You've done a good job. Look at my daughter. She's beautiful inside and out." The case of Zephany Nurse sent shockwaves through South Africa and the world. It forced hospitals to reevaluate their security and served as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that exist even in places that we normally would consider safe. But its deepest legacy lies in the questions it forces us to confront about our, identity, about forgiveness, and the very definition of what family is. Is it blood or is it something else? There are no easy heroes or villains really here. There is Celeste, a mother who showed incredible grace even towards her child's kidnapper. There is Mornay, a father whose quiet determination solved a 17-year-old mystery. There is Michael, poor Michael, an innocent man who had his family ripped apart by a lie he never knew about. Then there is Lavona, a woman whose desperate desire for a child led her to commit such a horrific crime. And at the center of it all is Michelle, a young woman who was forced to navigate an impossible reality and forge her own identity from the wreckage of two separate families. I mean, it's really unimaginable to live that type of life. Imagine finding out your entire life has been a lie. Those parents that raised you, loved you, fed you, helped you, disciplined you were complete strangers. I mean, the Solomon home is just 5 kilometers from the nurse's home. So when she was little, Michelle would run around on the field opposite the nurse's house while Michael played soccer. I mean, their stolen daughter was 5 kilometers away. It's wild. Despite Michelle loving Lavona, supporting her, visiting her in prison, etc., Michelle said that once she had children of her own, she put herself in Celeste's shoes. She could understand what it would have been like if someone took her own children away from her. She also put herself in Lavona's shoes. You know, what would it have been like having multiple miscarriages and no hope of a child of her own? So although she had a relationship with Lavona in prison, once Lavona was released, the relationship kind of just faded. And I guess Michelle realized that it was affecting her relationship with Celeste, her biological mom. And despite Michael trying to nurture the relationship between Lavona and Michelle, it's kind of just at a standstill. She doesn't want to find out more about Lavona because she's worried about what she will find out. You feel me? Her story teaches us that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, loyalty, memory, and ultimately, I guess, choice. And that the deepest scars are often the ones that no one can see. I really went into this case. I watched everything I could and I went through Reddit discussions. And a lot of people were like, Michael had to know, and, you know, Michael's not innocent. And I don't know how I feel about that. Looking at photos, I mean, what do I know? This is my opinion. Looking at photos of Michael and Michelle and just their interaction together, man, Michael loves Michelle. And not saying that, you know, he wouldn't have loved her if he knew that she was stolen. It just looks like he really thinks that that's his child. They still have a really good relationship. I believe he watches Michelle's kids, and Michelle's now married and, you know, has 3 kids, and he's an active part of it. And she also is actively involved with Celeste and Mornay as well. But poor Michael, you know, I'm not sure if he's back with Lavona while she's on parole, but I feel like that poor man's life was also just destroyed. I feel like Lavona knew, right? Unless this adoption thing is something she really believes. She's also never been remorseful. She kind of sticks by the fact of, nah, fam, it was a private adoption. I didn't know what I was doing. But she knew. You know what I'm saying? She knew. So yeah, I feel really bad for Michael. Looking at the photos, he just truly loves Michelle, and that's his baby girl, you know? But at the end of the day, it's not really a happy ending, but it's not a sad ending. It's a jumbled ending because, you know, for everyone involved, especially Michelle, this is going to be tough. And she's done an incredible job, you know, with all her interviews. She's so well-spoken. She is going through counseling. So obviously, you know, she's doing the work needed, but you can just tell she's an incredible person. I think that whole family is. I've always had this fear. You know, I've had 2 kids. And both times, especially when, you know, the people come to do the hearing tests or what other tests are done, whatever tests, they do tests and they go weigh the baby, things like that. I'm following. You're not taking my baby. The one time I let a nurse take my baby, she was like, you really need to sleep. You haven't slept. I'm going to cuddle him and, you know, you can have 2 hours to yourself. I was like, okay. I put my headphones in and I tried to get some sleep. But all I did was I was peeking because my room was near the nurse's station, and I was just peeking. I'm like, you holding my baby? Yeah. But my son had a really distinctive cry. So I didn't even end up sleeping because all I was doing was watching out for his cry, because in my freaking hospital, my husband was not allowed to stay because I didn't go private. So that was one of my biggest regrets. I got no sleep in the hospital and I was just Hawkeyeing my babies the whole time. The second time, my daughter had to have multiple hearing tests because she just kept moving and they couldn't determine whether she could hear or not. So they ended up taking her to a private room, and I was just I was not letting anyone take my kids. And I was like, are these my kids? I was double checking, are you my kid? You have the same wristband on and things. I was super paranoid. I think I'm just a bit of a psycho, but that's not surprising. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you in next week's video. Let me know your thoughts down below. And I love ya. Besitos. Mwah. Bye.